What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks onto a morning show set and finds himself face to face with a host who refuses to show basic respect? In just 41 seconds, what started as a routine interview transformed into one of the most explosive moments in daytime television history, and Savannah Guthrie would find herself at the center of a storm she never saw coming. The morning started like any other at Studio 1A in Rockefeller Plaza. Samuel L. Jackson arrived early, dressed sharply in a tailored black suit, ready to discuss his latest project. The energy on set felt normal. Cameras were positioned, lights were adjusted, production assistants rushed around making final preparations. But beneath the surface of this ordinary morning, tension was already building. Samuel settled into the guest chair across from Savannah Guthrie, Hoda Kotb, and Craig Melvin. The cameras rolled. The interview began. Savannah opened with what seemed like a standard question. "So Samuel, you've been in the industry for decades now. When are you going to finally take on a role that actually challenges you?" The studio went quiet. Samuel's expression shifted. He leaned forward slightly. "I'm sorry, what did you just ask me?" Savannah smiled, seemingly unaware of the weight of her words. "I mean, you do a lot of the same type of characters. The tough guy, the action hero. When are we going to see you stretch yourself as an actor?" Hoda shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Craig glanced between Savannah and Samuel, sensing the temperature in the room changing. Samuel took a slow breath, his jaw tightening. "Stretch myself? Have you actually watched any of my films? Do you know how many different characters I've played? How many genres I've worked in?" Savannah waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, sure, but let's be honest. You have a formula. You stick to what works. There's nothing wrong with that, but don't pretend you're taking risks." Crew behind the cameras exchanged shocked looks. This wasn't playful banter. This was something else entirely. Samuel sat back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Savannah's face. "A formula. That's what you think this is." "Well, isn't it?" Savannah pressed. "You show up, you say some cool lines, you cash the check. I'm just saying, actors like Daniel Day-Lewis, they disappear into roles. They transform." Hoda tried to intervene. "I think what Savannah means is—" "No, let her finish," Samuel said calmly. "I want to hear exactly what she thinks about my career." Savannah leaned forward, her tone becoming more pointed. "Look, I'm not trying to insult you. I'm just pointing out that you've found your lane and you stay in it, which is fine for some actors, but you're not exactly known for your range." Craig attempted to redirect. "Samuel, let's talk about your new film. What drew you to this particular project?" But Samuel wasn't ready to move on. "No, I want to address this. Because what Savannah's saying right here, right now, is that she doesn't respect my work. She's sitting here on national television telling me that my career, my choices, my craft, all of it is just me playing it safe." Savannah's smile faltered for a moment, but she pushed forward. "I'm doing my job. I'm asking tough questions. Isn't that what journalism is about?" "Journalism?" Samuel's voice rose slightly. "Is that what this is? Because it seems more like you decided before I even sat down what narrative you wanted to create. You didn't ask a question. You made a judgment." The tension was palpable now. Production assistants in the wings stood frozen, unsure whether to cut to commercial. Hoda spoke up again, her voice gentle. "Samuel, we're all big fans of your work here. I think maybe we can." "Are you, though?" Samuel turned his attention briefly to Hoda. "Because your co-host just spent the last 2 minutes telling me my entire body of work lacks depth." Savannah straightened in her chair, her voice taking on an edge. "I never said that. You're being oversensitive." "Oversensitive?" Samuel repeated slowly. "That's an interesting choice of words. I'm just saying you're taking this very personally when it's meant to be a professional discussion about your career choices." Samuel leaned forward again, his voice low but intense. "My career choices. Let me tell you about my career choices. I've played everything from a drug addict to a superhero. I've done Shakespeare. I've done drama. I've done comedy. I've worked with Spike Lee, Quentin Tarantino, the Coen brothers. I've been nominated for Academy Awards. But you sit here and tell me I don't take risks?" Savannah's expression hardened. "And yet you keep coming back to the same types of roles. That's not an opinion. That's an observation." "Based on what? Your expert analysis from this chair?" Craig tried once more to intervene. "I think we're getting a bit heated here. Maybe we should take a step back and—" "No, Craig," Savannah interrupted. "Samuel is a big boy. He can handle a real conversation." unless that's too much of a stretch for him too. The room went silent. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath. Samuel stood up slowly, never breaking eye contact with Savannah. You know what's really interesting about this moment? I came here to talk about a film that means something to me, a film about dignity, about respect, about how people treat each other. And instead, I'm sitting across from someone who thinks belittling a guest makes her a good journalist. Savannah stood as well, her voice rising. I'm not belittling you. I'm challenging you. There's a difference. Maybe you're just not used to people pushing back. Pushing back? Samuel's voice was controlled but powerful. You call this pushing back? This is disrespect dressed up as journalism. You don't know anything about my process. You don't know anything about the choices I make or why I make them. Hoda stood up, placing a hand on Savannah's arm. Let's everyone just take a breath here. But Savannah pulled away. No, if Samuel has something to say, he should say it. You want me to say it? Samuel's voice filled the studio. Fine, you invited me here under the pretense of a conversation. But this isn't a conversation. This is an ambush. You made up your mind about who I am and what my career means before I even walked through that door. Savannah crossed her arms. That's not true. I prepare for every interview. I ask substantive questions. Substantive? You attacked my credibility as an actor in the first 30 seconds. You dismissed decades of work with a wave of your hand. And now you're standing here acting like I'm the problem for calling it out. Craig stood now too, his hands raised in a calming gesture. Okay, I think we need to. What you need to do, Samuel said, turning to Craig, is ask yourself if this is the kind of show you want to be part of, one where guests are treated like this. Savannah's face flushed. You're being dramatic. This is what happens when someone isn't used to real questions. Real questions, Samuel said, shaking his head. Let me ask you a real question, Savannah. When you were preparing for this interview, did you actually watch any of my films? Did you do any research beyond reading whatever your producers handed you? Savannah's eyes flashed. Of course I did. Then how can you stand there and say I don't take risks? How can you say I lack range? Because it's the truth. Just because you don't want to hear it doesn't make it less true. Samuel took a step toward the desk. No, what's true is that you wanted to create a moment. You wanted something that would go viral, something that would get people talking, and you decided I was going to be your target today. That's ridiculous, Savannah shot back. You're paranoid. Am I? Because from where I'm standing, it's pretty clear what happened here. You thought you could take shots at me and I'd just smile and play along? Well, I'm not playing along. Hoda stepped between them. Samuel, please. Let's just calm down and restart this conversation. Samuel looked at Hoda, and his expression softened slightly. Hoda, you seem like a decent person. But your co-host just spent the last 5 minutes insulting me on national television. There's no restarting from that. Savannah laughed, a harsh sound. Insulting you? You really are sensitive, aren't you? I asked you about your career. That's my job. No, Samuel said firmly. Your job is to have a conversation. Your job is to treat your guests with basic respect. What you did was something else entirely. I don't have to coddle you just because you're famous. Coddle me? Samuel's voice rose again. I don't want to be coddled. I want to be treated like a professional. I want to be given the same respect I've given this show by showing up here today. Craig moved closer. Samuel, man to man, I understand you're upset, but let's not let this get out of hand. Samuel turned to Craig. It's already out of hand, Craig. The moment your co-host decided to attack me instead of interview me, it got out of hand. Savannah threw her hands up. Attack? You keep using that word. I asked you tough questions. That's not an attack. You didn't ask questions. You made accusations. There's a difference. Oh, please. You're just mad because someone finally called you out. Samuel stared at her for a long moment. Called me out? For what exactly? For having a successful career? For making choices you don't agree with? For not living up to your personal standards of what an actor should be? For being lazy, Savannah said. And the words hung in the air like a bomb. The entire studio seemed to freeze. Hoda gasped audibly. Craig closed his eyes. The crew stood motionless. This was no longer just a difficult interview. This had become something far more serious. The atmosphere in the studio shifted from tense to explosive in the space of a single breath. Samuel's voice when he spoke was quiet, almost a whisper. What did you just call me? Savannah didn't back down. You heard me. You've gotten lazy. You take the easy roles, the big paychecks, and you coast. "Savannah," Hoda said urgently. "That's enough." But Savannah ignored her. "It's true, and everyone knows it. You just keep doing the same thing over and over." "That's the definition of lazy." Samuel nodded slowly, his face unreadable. "Lazy. After 40 years in this industry, after hundreds of films, after working my way up from nothing, after earning every single opportunity I've ever gotten, you call me lazy. If the shoe fits," Savannah said with a shrug. Samuel picked up his microphone pack and started removing it. "What are you doing?" Craig asked. "I'm leaving," Samuel said simply, "because I don't have to sit here and be disrespected like this." Savannah laughed again. "Oh, so now you're going to storm off? Very professional." Samuel paused, looking directly at her. "You want to talk about professional? A professional journalist does their homework. A professional journalist asks informed questions. A professional journalist doesn't attack their guests for shock value. But you wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" "How dare you?" Savannah said, her voice shaking with anger now. "I've been doing this job for years, and yet you still don't understand what the job actually is," Samuel replied. "This isn't about journalism for you. This is about ego. This is about making yourself feel important by tearing someone else down." Hoda tried again. "Please, both of you, this has gone too far." But Samuel was already walking toward the exit. "Where do you think you're going?" Savannah called after him. "We're not done here." Samuel stopped and turned back. "Yes, we are. I'm done. I'm done with this interview. I'm done with this show. And I'm done with being treated like I'm beneath you." "You're making a huge mistake," Savannah said. "Do you know how this is going to look?" "How it's going to look." Samuel's voice was incredulous. "You just called a guest on your show lazy on live television. You attacked my character, my work ethic, my entire career, and you're worried about how I'm going to look?" Craig stepped forward. "Samuel, please, let's go to commercial and figure this out." Samuel shook his head. "There's nothing to figure out, Craig. Your co-host made it very clear how she feels, and I'm not going to stand here and be her punching bag." Savannah moved around the desk. "You're being ridiculous. I ask one challenging question, and you fall apart." "One question?" Samuel's voice was sharp. "You've spent the entire interview trying to diminish everything I've accomplished, and now you're trying to gaslight me into thinking I'm the problem. Maybe you are the problem. Maybe you can't handle real criticism. Criticism would require you to actually know what you're talking about. What you're doing is just mean-spirited." Hoda was nearly in tears now. "Please stop, both of you. This is getting out of control." Samuel's expression softened when he looked at Hoda. She had always been kind to him during previous appearances. "You're right, Hoda. It is out of control, and that's why I need to leave, before this gets any worse." But Savannah wasn't done. "You leave now and you'll never be welcome back on this show." Samuel actually smiled at that. "You think that's a threat? After what just happened here, why would I ever want to come back?" "Because we're the Today Show. We can make or break careers." "Is that what you think?" Samuel asked quietly. "That you have that kind of power?" "I know we do." Samuel shook his head slowly. "You really believe that, don't you? You really think that being on this show is some kind of privilege that I should be grateful for? It is a privilege. Millions of people watch us every morning, and millions of people have watched my films. The difference is I earn their respect. You're just sitting in a chair someone else gave you." Savannah's face went red. "How dare you speak to me that way?" "How dare I?" Samuel's voice rose one final time. "How dare you? You invited me here. I took time out of my schedule to be on your show. And you've done nothing but disrespect me from the moment I sat down. So yes, how dare you?" Craig put his hand on Samuel's shoulder. "Let's all take a beat here." Samuel gently removed Craig's hand. "I appreciate what you're trying to do, Craig, but there's no coming back from this." She crossed a line. Multiple lines, actually. "I didn't cross anything," Savannah insisted. "I did my job." "No," Samuel said firmly. "You abused your position. You used this platform to attack someone who couldn't fight back without looking bad. That's not journalism. That's bullying." "Bullying?" Savannah's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Poor Samuel L. Jackson, the big movie star being bullied by the mean morning show host. You're proving my point right now. You can't even see it, can you? You can't see how inappropriate you're being." Hoda was crying openly now. "Please, Samuel, don't go." "We can fix this." Samuel's voice was gentle when he spoke to her. "Some things can't be fixed, Hoda. Your co-host made sure of that." He turned one last time to Savannah. You wanted a moment? You got one. I hope it was worth it. And with that, Samuel L. Jackson walked off the set of The Today Show. The cameras kept rolling, capturing Savannah's shocked expression, Hoda's tears, and Craig's look of disbelief. The studio fell into chaos as producers rushed onto the set, trying to figure out what to do next. Savannah stood there, seemingly unable to process what had just happened. She'd pushed and pushed, never believing that one of the biggest stars in Hollywood would actually walk away. But he did. And in doing so, he'd made it clear that no amount of fame or platform gave anyone the right to treat another person with such blatant disrespect. The interview that was supposed to last 15 minutes had imploded in less than 10. What started as a promotional appearance had transformed into a masterclass in standing up for oneself, in refusing to accept poor treatment just because cameras were rolling. As Samuel disappeared through the studio doors, the weight of what had transpired settled over everyone present. This wasn't just a celebrity having a bad day. This was a line being drawn. This was someone saying, enough is enough. This was dignity in action. The crew scrambled to cut to commercial. Producers shouted instructions. Hoda tried to compose herself. Craig sat back down, running his hands over his face. And Savannah stood alone at the desk, finally silent, perhaps beginning to realize the magnitude of what she'd done. In the span of those few minutes, everything had changed. A routine morning interview had become something else entirely. It had become a statement, a moment that would be dissected and discussed, a reminder that respect isn't optional, regardless of who you are or where you're sitting. And Samuel L. Jackson, by walking away, had delivered the most powerful message of all, that self-respect matters more than any interview, any platform, any moment of publicity, that there are some lines that shouldn't be crossed, and that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simply refuse to participate in your own disrespect. The studio lights continued to shine. The cameras kept recording, but the interview was over. Samuel had made his choice. He'd drawn his line, and he'd walked away with his dignity intact, leaving behind a host who'd learned, perhaps too late, that being provocative and being professional are not the same thing. As the chaos continued around her, as producers tried to salvage what was left of the show, as social media began to explode with reactions, Savannah Guthrie stood at that desk facing the reality of what her words had cost. Not just the interview, not just the guest, but something far more valuable: her credibility, her reputation, her claim to being a journalist who treated people with respect. The morning had started normally. It had ended in disaster. Back on set, the silence was deafening. Savannah finally sat down, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of the desk. Hoda wiped her eyes, looking between her co-host and the empty chair where Samuel had been sitting just moments ago. That, Craig said slowly, was not how that was supposed to go. Savannah's jaw tightened. He overreacted. You both saw it. I was just doing my job. Hoda's voice was soft but firm. Savannah, you called him lazy. On live television. How did you expect him to react? I expected him to defend his work, not run away like a child. Craig leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. He didn't run away. He left because you attacked him. There's a difference. I didn't attack anyone, Savannah insisted, her voice rising. I asked legitimate questions about his career trajectory. That's what journalists do. A producer rushed over, headset askew, panic written across his face. We need to go to commercial. Now. No, Savannah said. We need to address what just happened. Savannah, the producer said urgently, we don't have a plan for this. We need time to regroup. But Savannah was already looking at the camera. Ladies and gentlemen, what you just witnessed was a guest walking off our show because he couldn't handle a frank discussion about his work. This is the reality of celebrity culture today. Ask a tough question and they walk away. Hoda put her hand on Savannah's arm. Stop. Please stop talking. But Savannah shook her off. No, Hoda. People need to understand what happened here. Samuel L. Jackson came on this show expecting softball questions and praise. When he didn't get that, he threw a tantrum. Craig stood up abruptly. That's not what happened, and you know it. The cameras were still rolling. The crew watched in horror as the situation continued to unravel. Savannah turned to Craig, her eyes flashing. Oh, so now you're taking his side. I'm not taking anyone's side. I'm stating facts. You went after him from the first question. You questioned his talent, his choices, his work ethic. And when he defended himself, you doubled down. I was challenging him. You were insulting him, Craig said flatly. There's a difference between a challenging question and a personal attack. Savannah stood up again, facing Craig directly. So what? We're supposed to just let celebrities come on here and say whatever they want? Never push back? Never ask hard questions? Hard questions? Hoda's voice broke. You told one of Ezen, the most successful actors of our generation, that he was lazy. That's not a hard question. That's just cruel. It's honest, Savannah shot back. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe people can't handle honesty anymore. The producer tried again. Guys, please. We really need to. No, Savannah said, turning back to the camera. You know what? I'm glad this happened. Because it shows exactly what's wrong with Hollywood. These actors live in bubbles where everyone tells them how great they are. And the moment someone dares to challenge that narrative, they can't handle it. Craig moved into her line of sight. Savannah, stop. You're making this worse. Worse? How could this possibly be worse? He already left. And you're sitting here on live television justifying what you did. You're not showing any self-reflection. You're not considering that maybe, just maybe, you were wrong. Savannah's face flushed deeper. Wrong? About what? About pointing out that Samuel L. Jackson plays the same type of character in every movie? That's not wrong. That's observable fact. That's your opinion, Hoda said quietly. And you presented it as fact. You didn't ask him about his choices. You told him his choices were wrong. Because they are, Savannah insisted. He's one of the most talented actors of his generation, and he wasted on popcorn movies and action franchises. Craig laughed, a sound without humor. And there it is. You don't respect commercial cinema. You think actors who make popular films are somehow less than? I didn't say that. You didn't have to. It's been dripping from every word you've said since he sat down. The producer had given up trying to intervene. The entire crew stood frozen, watching the hosts turn on each other. Savannah pointed at the empty chair. He walked off. That's on him, not me. He walked off because you gave him no choice, Hoda said, her voice stronger now. You backed him into a corner. You insulted him. Repeatedly. What did you think was going to happen? I thought he'd be professional enough to handle a tough interview. It wasn't a tough interview, Craig said. It was an interrogation. It was a setup. You decided before he even got here that you were going to take him down a peg. Savannah's hands clenched into fists. That's not true. Isn't it? Because from where I was sitting, it sure looked like you had an agenda. My agenda was to have a real conversation, not a puff piece. There's a middle ground between a puff piece and an attack, Hoda said, and you didn't even try to find it. Savannah looked between her two co-hosts, her expression hardening. So this is how it's going to be? You're both going to gang up on me? We're not ganging up on you, Craig said tiredly. We're trying to help you see what you did. What I did was my job. No, Hoda said firmly. What you did was cross a line, multiple lines. And you're still crossing them right now by refusing to acknowledge it. The producer finally cut the feed, signaling frantically for a commercial break. The studio descended into organized chaos as the crew tried to figure out how to proceed. Savannah stood at the desk, isolated now, as production staff rushed past her. She looked at the empty chair again, at the spot where Samuel had been sitting. For just a moment, something flickered across her face. Doubt, maybe, or realization. But then her expression hardened again, and she turned away, walking off the set without another word to her co-hosts. Craig and Hoda remained, sitting in silence amid the chaos. That was bad, Craig said finally. That was worse than bad, Hoda replied. That was career-ending. For who? Hoda looked toward the direction Savannah had gone. Maybe for all of us, but especially for her. Meanwhile, in a car heading away from Rockefeller Plaza, Samuel L. Jackson stared out the window at the Manhattan streets passing by. His phone was already buzzing with calls and texts, but he ignored them all. He'd said what he needed to say. He'd stood up for himself when it mattered most, and he'd walked away with his dignity intact. Back in the studio, the producers were having heated discussions about how to salvage the rest of the show. The empty chair remained on set, a silent reminder of what had just transpired. The cameras had captured everything, every word, every expression, every moment of the confrontation that would soon be replaying on every news outlet and social media platform in the world. Savannah had wanted a moment. She'd wanted something memorable, and she'd gotten it, just not in the way she'd intended. Because sometimes, when you push someone too far, when you cross too many lines, when you forget that respect is a two-way street, The moment you create isn't the one you wanted. It's the one you deserve. And somewhere outside that studio, Samuel L. Jackson was taking off his microphone, climbing into a car, and leaving behind a moment that would define both of their careers in ways neither could have predicted when the cameras first started rolling.